Fall is in the air, and there really is nothing like a home team advantage. That's why Team Toyota makes an obvious choice for your next vehicle purchase or service. With their MVP pricing guarantee, teammates reward program, and streamlined customer experience, their award-winning sales and service departments are there for all of your vehicle needs. A home team advantage is nothing without family and community. Their employees are part of the family, part of your town, and we're all part of the team. Visit teamtoyota.net and choose one of 3 locations in Langhorne, Glen Mills, or Princeton. Hello, everybody, and thanks for listening to the Phillies Talk podcast. I'm Corey Seidman. He's Ricky Batalico, and we're sitting down here the morning after the Phillies came to a 7-year agreement with Aaron Nola to keep him in a Phillies uniform. 7 years, $172 million. Ricky, this was the biggest piece of the Phillies offseason puzzle, and it's now in place very early in the offseason. Just your initial impressions of this monster contract the Phillies gave Aaron Nola.
Wow, quick. I think that would be my first thing is that, wow, this happened very fast. This tells me one thing, that the player knew what he wanted to do. He knew where he wanted to be. He knew where his heart was. He knew where his family wanted him to be, because you don't see these contracts usually getting done till towards Christmas, especially a guy when you're really thinking about there's really 3 big names out on the market and then one coming from overseas. You would think this thing would have taken up at least till Christmas, if not a little bit longer. But I think what it really came down to is Aaron Nola had his eyes set on Philadelphia. And once they got to a number that he was comfortable, that was it. He was all done. And I think, to me, I think that's great. I think if that's where you want to play, I thought the annual value was a little bit low, but hey, you know what? If he's happy with it, everybody else should be too.
Yeah, the Phillies have done a good job with a lot of these humongous contracts they've handed out of keeping the AAV low by spreading out the number of years. Like it all started with Bryce Harper, obviously the 13-year deal. Trey Turner, 11 years, $300 million. That's less than 30. Zack Wheeler, it was 5 years for 118. So that's 23.6. Similar number with JT Realmuto. And this Aaron Nola contract checks in at just under $25 million per year. So yes, it takes him through his age 37 season, but this is what the price of top-end starting pitching is. And, you mentioned a couple of the other alternatives. The top 2 non-Yamamoto starting pitching free agents were Blake Snell and Sonny Gray, and they both come with significant durability and injury concerns. Snell also, I know he just won the Cy Young for the second time, but he also walked 99 batters to lead the major league. So I don't think the Phillies would have felt totally comfortable giving out a ton of money to either of those guys. And they know Aaron Nola. They've seen Aaron Nola up close year after year. They've watched him develop. They've watched him grow into this player who's put together a pretty impressive postseason resume over the last 2 years. I know that things did not work out in Game 6 of the NLCS, but when he started to weigh the options, Nola against some of these other free agents, and then you think about the trade candidates and what it would take to both acquire them and then extend him, Nola just seemed like the obvious, plan A, and the Phillies made it clear that he was their plan A.
It was plan A. Plus, I think it was the most simple one that they could come up with. I think I don't even think the Phillies were really into Snell. I don't know how many teams are. I mean, you brought up injury concerns, you brought up things like that. And I think if you were going to lean with Sonny Gray, I would have tried to be in the situation where, okay, I'm going to have to get Sonny Gray, but I only want to give him the same amount of years for as long as we're going to have Wheeler here, because I believe that's going to be the next thing on the starting pitching. I guess carousel would be trying to extend Zack Wheeler. I think that would probably be up there on their list. But I look at it this way. You know what? You got the guy you wanted. You're familiar with him, which you just brought up. And I think that might be the most important piece. It's almost like, okay, he's got a new contract. Let's just move on. We don't really have to worry about Aaron Nola. He knows the situation in the clubhouse. He knows what he needs to do to be prepared every day. He knows Caleb Cotham. So, I mean, to me, it's like washing your hands of it. Okay, we re-signed him. It's just like an extension to them, more or less. And I think it's great that he's already been in there and has already gone for his physical. That's a guy that just wants to get it done and move on and enjoy his offseason and get ready to play baseball in 24. So I think you made Aaron Nola happy. And I think that's half a battle with baseball players.
So the speed of this signing, it would seem like some of it had to do with the fact that the Braves were also hot after Nola. The Braves had already started making moves early in this offseason to clear payroll space, to clear 40-man roster space. They are known to be after starting pitching, and Alex Anthopoulos, who runs that front office, said after the season that they're going to increase payroll. So every sign was pointing toward the Braves potentially signing Aaron Nola. If they did, not only would they have been adding pitching, but they'd be subtracting it from the Phillies. So I would expect that whole pursuit by Atlanta had to play a role in how seriously and aggressively the Phillies took things in this month of November.
Yeah, I think we all know John Middleton. He's not going to be outbid. He's not going to be pushed around by anybody. But I also think that they had that extra piece to them that they knew Aaron wanted to come back. I mean, he made that perfectly clear that he wanted to be a Philly. And I mean, what did I read this correctly? He's going to be 16 years as a Philly after this contract. Is that correct?
9 years,
That is
all 9. Yep.
unreal, isn't it? I mean, that to me is great. Being in one place is always a comfort zone for baseball players. But I think this all came down to John Middleton saying, get it done. If you have to add an extra year, you get it done. And let's just move on from this. Let's see if we can't get it done before Thanksgiving. It'll be a nice little present for everybody. And, we know how Middleton works. He's not going to be outbid. And if he thinks there's something out there that he really wants and the team needs, he's going to go get it. That's one thing I think he's proven to me in the last 5 or 6 years is that he's a go-getter now. He's going to get whatever he needs to make this team better.
So in totality, when you think about this Aaron Nola situation, they were unable to reach the agreement before the end of spring training last year, which wasn't ideal. They would have preferred to have him locked up, but they were too far apart in negotiations. But when you look at how everything played out, $172 million over 7 years is pretty much what I think many would have expected this Aaron Nola contract would check in at. Carlos Rodon signed the biggest pitching contract a year ago. That was 6 for 162. And again, right, when you do the math, it's the Nola contract is an additional year, but for 10 million more. So that drags the AAV down from like the 27 million of Rodon's to 24.5 million for Nola. Maybe that helps you, bring in another player and remain under the second luxury tax, for example, whether that's this year or next year. But I think the Phillies are past the point of worrying about or caring about the luxury tax threshold. I mean, they've surpassed it 2 years in a row. They've contended deep into the playoffs 2 years in a row. And they look like they're going to continue to do what it takes financially to keep this team at that level. That being said, it doesn't seem like there's a ton else on the radar this offseason. We've talked about this before, that the big priorities were Nola, figuring out how you can add some offense, and that's probably going to be in the form of a outfielder, and then finding bullpen help for the back end of the bullpen to replace Craig Kimbrell. But I mean, after this,
help is usually late. I mean, let's face it, that usually comes last, and you could almost see that getting done some point in January. I mean, if it really comes down to it, I think the Phillies were in a hurry to get their guy signed. They got him signed. That's going to be their splash right now. Yeah, it doesn't seem like they're into this, let's go make a big wave. But what they did do, and no matter what way we want to look at it, they put pressure on the Atlanta Braves. They stole a pitcher from the Atlanta Braves. I heard from at least 2 different people that there was an opportunity that Aaron Nola was going to the Atlanta Braves, and the Braves may have thought it was going to get done last week. So when you look at it as a whole, you just stole a pitcher away from the Atlanta Braves, which is, in my book, every time a positive.
Yeah, that's a good point, too, because now the Braves have to figure out how they are adding starting pitching. Like, they've made clear that they want to. Now it looks like they're pivoting to Sonny Gray. It doesn't seem like they have a ton of interest in Blake Snell either. The Braves are an organization that has a lot of prospects, has a lot of trade ammunition should they want to go after a guy like Corbin Burns or Dylan Cease or whoever it may be. But that's a fair point you just made, that they stole a pitcher away from the Braves. Maybe that makes the Braves a little worse in 2024, depending on who they end up with.
I don't know how much worse they're going to get, Corey. Come on.
Well, I mean, we saw at the end of last year, though, that they didn't really have a number 3 starter. Not anybody they could trust. Some of that was health. With Charlie
That's 2 years in a row. That's 2 years in a row. Yeah.
2 years in a row. And they have to look at that as one of the main reasons that they've fallen short. Although for the Braves, it was also the fact that their historic offense was held in check by Phillies pitching. But just in terms of Nola's overall ability, his skill set, his value over the next 7 years, there comes a point in every pitcher's career when, Father Time catches up. And for some guys, it's gradual. And for some guys, it's sudden. Like for Roy Halladay, it was pretty sudden. I think back to James Shields, it was sudden. The Phillies are hoping that for Aaron Nola, that doesn't happen until, we get closer to 2030 at this point. But
yeah, I would think they're looking for at least 4 or 5 good years out of this contract. You never, let's face it, you sign a starting pitcher to a 7-year contract, you're probably thinking he's going to miss time somewhere in there. I mean, there's a pretty good chance. I don't care how durable you are. There's a chance that could happen. Although you look at Aaron Nola's numbers, look at his starts every year, 30 plus starts all the time. And to me, I mean, that's special in itself. You know me, I've always said I like them. I like that he goes out there, he competes. He's not flashy, which is what a lot of people around here don't really love. He doesn't necessarily wear his heart out on his sleeve all the time either, and they don't love that either. But what he does give you is quality pitching all the time and steady. I think that may be the best way to put it. He's extremely, extremely steady.
6 years in a row, Nola has not missed a start. So we're talking about dating back to 2018 that he's made his full complement of starts. And I remember when he first came up, hearing people, and not just fans, I mean, hearing baseball people talk about with Nola's whip-like delivery that this guy's going to get hurt eventually. And yet he's avoided that injury. I mean, he did finish the 2017 season on the IL, sidelined by an elbow injury that didn't require Tommy John surgery. So he was able to avoid that. But this is now 6 years running that he's been basically a 200 inning per year guy over the course of a full season. So it's like, does that bode well for the future? Is that an ominous sign because it means of all the bullets on his shoulder? I mean, to your point, this is 2 years in a row now where he's been at his sharpest mostly 8 months into the baseball calendar in the month of October. Again, I know he didn't pitch well in Game 6 of the NLCS against the Diamondbacks, but in the 3 playoff starts leading into that, 2 earned runs in 16 innings.
Right. You also have to give some credit here to Caleb Cotham. And you know me, I rarely give credit to anybody but the pitchers that are on the mound. But, I mean, he gave him, if you remember, he was giving him extra days in August, kind of trying to lead him back into a situation where he was at 100%. Because, you know what, as a pitcher, you're not 100% all year. I don't care. Even if you're not injured, you're not going to be 100%. You're not going to feel 100%. But what the Phillies tried to do, and it wasn't just Aaron Nola, but it was pretty much their whole staff. Okay, we're going to give some extra days here and here. Let's see if this can't kind of catapult us into being positive in September and October. And I think it worked for the most part for Aaron Nola. I mean, I know Zack Wheeler hated it. I know he doesn't like going on anything but 4 days rest and get me in the game. That's what I'm paid for type thing. But I think it definitely benefited a guy like Aaron Nola. And, I mean, they went to that six-man rotation. That was about a month, if I'm not wrong, correct? And I don't think that hurt them at all in that type of situation. Now, granted, don't people out there don't take the words and say that I love a 6-man rotation, because I don't. But I think it worked for this team coming off of a World Series appearance in 2022, and now you're going back in deep in the season again. I wouldn't be surprised if they try that again next year.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was thinking about the 6-man rotation in relation to Brandon Woodruff, who was non-tendered by the Brewers, a guy who's going to miss most of the 2024 season after undergoing shoulder surgery. And I was just thinking about him in regard to, I think the most logical fit for a guy like Woodruff would be a contending team that expects to be able to use him late in the season, in the second half, potentially in the playoffs if he's ready. And this is neither here nor there, but just thinking that that's a potentially high upside guy that you might be able to get for less money than it would ordinarily take, that might be able to help you late in the season and also protect you in terms of depth. But when you start to look at the rotation 1 through 5, I would imagine that at this point, November 20th, there's a ton of offseason to go. But there's probably no team in all of baseball that feels more comfortable about its rotation than the Phillies right now, because they have their entire 5-man staff laid out. Wheeler, Nola, Suarez, Walker, Christopher Sanchez. Other than Wheeler, all of these guys are under team control or under contract for at least 2 more seasons. Sanchez can't become a free agent until 2028. Now, the big piece of this is obviously Wheeler. The Phillies are not going to want to get to the regular season without extending him, and Dave Dombrowski's already talked about how much of a focus it is to keep Wheeler in the fold for years to come. So that's the next big piece here. Wheeler is going to pitch at age 34 in 2024. He has well exceeded expectations in signing that 5-year contract with the Phillies. He's become one of the best pitchers in baseball. But when you start to think about the calculations, much different sort of situation than with Aaron Nola, because Wheeler's not going to be in line for a 7-year deal that takes him through age 41 or 42, for example.
No, he's going to look for AAV. I mean, he's going to look for those yearly values that he can get. And let's face it, you look at Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, that's where he is now. So you're talking those 3-year deals upwards of $120 million. So, things change when you get a little deeper into your career. He's not going to be looking 5 to 7 years. What it's going to be is 2 or 3 years somewhere. And if they pay it big time, then he's going to go with it. Unless, of course, he's happy like Aaron Nola is. I mean, you look at Wheeler's contract right now, it's very nice. It's a nice deal for both. He's making a lot of money. The team didn't have to overpay him. So I look at it this way. If he's in that same boat as Aaron Nola, he very well could be. The Phillies might get away cheap again. I mean, you're shaking your head, but it's true.
Yeah, I just think that Zack Wheeler has dominated and impressed the rest of baseball so much to this point that when it comes time, you're going to have to pay that guy $35 to $40 million per year over a short-term deal. Why not? I mean, He's been one of the most impactful players in all of Major League Baseball over the last few seasons.
He's been really good. And I mean, he's the one guy that I literally look at and say, wow, he makes adjustments better than anybody in this league while he's on the field, while he's on the mound, in between pitches. And that's not the easiest thing in the world to do. I think people just think, okay, so he went out there, made an adjustment, made a better pitch. No, it's not about that. Sometimes your mechanics go a little haywire and he's able to fix it right away. That's really hard. That's knowing your body extremely well. That's knowing exactly who you are out on the mound. That's why he's so good. Everybody's going to have a bad game now and again. But if you could stop that game from being awful to just being a bad game, I mean, you might save your team a win in that type of situation. So, I mean, I love Zack Wheeler. I think he's the only guy in Major League Baseball that I believe can go strictly fastball and still get people out all throughout a whole game.
Yeah, he is. He's something special. And talking about minimizing damage and not letting that one big inning ruin the game. I mean, that was a problem for Aaron Nola for large stretches of 2023, large stretches of 2021. It hasn't been a smooth ride all the way for Nola. There were bumps along the way. 2019, 2021. There was a period there where it seemed like it was an every other year thing for Aaron Nola. 2021 and 2023, rather, when he had the ERAs in the mid to high 4s, sandwiched around years where he had an ERA in the low 3s. We saw this past season the home run ball was a problem for much of the year. The pitch clock affected him. Wouldn't you think at this point, though, that going into 2024, that the pitch clock is going to be a thing of the past for anybody who was affected negatively by it?
Well, they're looking to lower it 2 more seconds, so who knows? I mean, it could start all over again. But here's the thing. Let's say 70% of the pitchers that are in Major League Baseball right now have already gone through this in the minor leagues. So it doesn't even phase. It's over for them. It's those other 30% that have been in the big leagues for a while that, it might bother them here and there. But, I mean, you look at Aaron Nola right now. I thought he got a lot better as time went on in the season with the pitch clock. Sometimes you just got to forget about it and just pitch your game. I think one guy that'll never go away on is Craig Kimbrell. So I'm happy that problem is not going to be us anymore, because I just think that he's so stuck in his old time ways that he can't get out of his own way with the pitch clock situations. But I mean, in my opinion, I think 20, 18 seconds, that's a long time in between pitches. I know people will say, well, when you're out there, it's not that long. Yeah, it is. It actually is. I've been out there. I just wanted the ball in fire. That was the way I used to go about it. I just think Aaron Nola has kind of come to terms with it and understands where he needs to be with it.
Yeah, by the postseason, there were barely any violations league-wide from game to game. So sure seemed like pitchers adapt. And that could also be why Major League Baseball is thinking about trimming a few extra seconds. But pitch clock certainly seemed to work in year one. Celebrity cook Steve Martirano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martirano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations for Martirano's Prime on OpenTable. All right, Ricky. So as we said, very early in the offseason, November 20th, it's the week of Thanksgiving. The winter meetings are 2 weeks away. The Phillies have made splashes at the winter meetings in years past, including Trey Turner an offseason ago. But are you kind of expecting that at this point that there could be, mostly silence for a good period of the offseason?
Yeah, I'm expecting some quietness. I think you make an early splash. That happens a lot to teams where, okay, we go out and sign our guy, and that's what we wanted. That when you get in trouble as a team, when let's say Aaron Nola was your number one goal, like the Braves are in that kind of situation right now, that they're saying to themselves, okay, what direction do we go right now? Do we go Sonny Gray? How many years now do we? It's all a reconfiguration. I mean, you look at the Phillies, they got what they wanted. They did what they needed to do. And now I don't look, I don't love the status quo situation because you're going in with virtually the same team as you did last year. You might change up a couple relievers. That's not changing your team. I think if an offer were to hit them in the face for somebody, I think that might change things. But right now, I think they're thinking about, okay, status quo. I don't really get the Jake Cave thing or the Stubbs thing this early. I don't understand those signings.
Well, so it was
besides that, I don't know.
So it was the non-tender deadline the other day. So the Phillies had to make a decision whether to tender contracts to these guys who were under club control. So there was a potential thought that maybe Garrett Stubbs might get non-tendered because Rafael Marchand is coming closer to the majors. His option situation, while it's not totally solved, there's a potential that he may be out of options, Marchand. So if he is, you wouldn't want to have to pass a guy like that through waivers. And then Jake Cave, again, a guy that they probably could have declined the contract offer to and
still would have been out there. Still would have been out there.
Right. It was $1 million. So they're probably looking at it like for a fifth outfielder or for a bench bat that, they might not be able to find somebody, a veteran for that same price tag. But I agree with you. Jake Cave, a guy like that would have lingered out there. Guys like that always tend to linger out there. He might not even end up making the roster, though. It doesn't just because those guys are given contracts between $850K and $1 million in November doesn't mean they're going to be on the active roster. But just in terms of the status quo, like you talked about. So let's imagine that the Phillies, the rest of this offseason, they add a reliever, a back-end reliever, and they add, a decent but not spectacular outfield bat, someone in the ilk of like a Tommy Pham, not particularly him, but someone of that level, a guy who's like a 6 out of 10, right?
Kevin Kiermaier, although you don't really need another lefty bat.
And I would think that if you're going to go for outfield help, you have the defense with Rojas. You should go get some offense, right? But so let's imagine they do that. They add a reliever, and that like the Braves add a Sonny Gray, right? And that the rest of the offseason around Major League Baseball plays out realistically. Are the Phillies a World Series contender in 2024?
I think they're the exact same as last year. I think they're going to contend. Let's face it, they're going to make the playoffs. There's 3 wild cards. Look at their roster. I would say, barring huge injuries, you make the playoffs. Probably as a number one wild card. I just don't. Player for player, I do not think they're as good as the Braves yet. I think their pitching staff obviously is right there with the Braves, if not better than the Braves. But I just think that can the Braves duplicate what they did offensively last year is the question that would be thrown out there, because doing what they did last year, historic numbers, home run wise, and it was everybody on their team. I mean, it wasn't just one guy, going. Is Olsen going to hit 50? I mean, come on, really? This is going to be an interesting situation to see if they can bounce back with the same life that they had last year. You never see a Braves team that's been that good offensively until this past year. And the Phillies have to just step it up. I mean, they spent a good amount of time without Bryce Harper last year. So I think they have a bonus in that. I would really like to see them win the division. I think that's something that you could strive for a little bit this year. Try to win that division, at least put up a fight to the Braves to the end, So beyond that, I think they're going to be contenders as they have been the last couple of years.
Yeah, with these 3 wild cards, I mean, it really just does say that if you have a good team, if you have a team that you believe is like well above average, that has the talent level, you're probably going to make the playoffs, barring a catastrophe, barring something like what happened to the 2023 New York Mets. So then it just becomes like, how do you get over the hump when it matters most? Because 2024 is going to be a weird season for the Phillies in the sense that the expectations are so high now, right? They weren't this high 2 years ago. They weren't even this high last year. But now, after 2 years of making deep runs, anything less than a return to the World Series and a World Series win is going to be viewed as a disappointment. So it's going to be one of those regular seasons, kind of a la 2011, where for 6 months, a win is expected, a loss pisses people off. And if the team doesn't hit all cylinders, it's going to be criticized. I saw Spike Eskin, our buddy, former WIP guy, tweeted out about the Oklahoma City Thunder over the weekend, that they are in the perfect era of sports fandom where there's no expectations, but the team's pretty good. And I was thinking, it's so poignant because those are, from a fan perspective, you see that's when fans have the most fun, is when they can just like react to the drama and all the positivity that's happening without getting upset when things don't go perfectly well.
It's going to be interesting because it is, let's face it, even for John Middleton, it's like World Series or bust. This guy wants that trophy. There's no doubt about it. And, coming up short. They came up short 2 years ago. They came up very short last year. There's no way, in my eyes, they should have lost to the Diamondbacks. I mean, just a team that was nowhere near in the same class as the Phillies. But then you look at the Texas Rangers, and they are a couple of years ahead of where they should have been. And they could tear the cover off the ball also. So, there's some teams out there that are built like the Phillies, and there's some teams that you expect to be in the playoffs once again, just like the Phillies. But, I mean, the bottom line is, my thought is, I sit back and say, how much is this fan base going to take? You know what I mean? They've gotten to the World Series. They got no hit in that World Series, and things went downhill. They've gotten to the NLCS, and things went very much downhill when they went on the road to start with in that series. And then the big guys didn't show up. And, sometimes all that fun and games, it wears on a fan base. I wonder if that wore on the fan base a little bit. I know they love the fun and games. I do too. I love when they're going crazy after a win and this and that in the clubhouse. I love that. But, maybe a little bit more business-like, you think, this year or no?
A little more buttoned up. I can't lie. It's something I've been thinking about over the last few weeks since the season ended, is whether this team is going to have the same personality in 2024 and beyond as it has had these last two seasons. Because again, that plays into the expectations where it's almost like a bunch of kids who are loving life and playing above their heads, that then now it's like you have to get serious. And but I think one thing is clear, which is that if the Phillies did not bring back Aaron Nola, if they did not find a suitable replacement, they would have been taking a big step back. Because for whatever people think about Aaron Nola from April through September, he's proven to be a difference maker once the Phillies get to the promised land, even though they weren't able to finish the job 2 years in a row. You need top-end starting pitching. You need guys who can go 6-7 innings deep into games. We've seen the Phillies' playoff opponents falter because they haven't had their version of Wheeler and Nola. And now the Phillies know they'll have it for at least one more year with Nola in the fold as they look to extend Zack Wheeler. So thanks a lot for listening to this Phillies Talk podcast. We'll catch you later in the offseason.